Hello, I'm Sharon and this is Hooked on Books, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the genre of history. It's not a genre that I know much about, it's not a genre that I feel comfortable, confident or happy to talk about, but it's a genre that I have slowly become more interested in it. And I think a lot of the time when you don't read a particular genre very much, you don't feel like you know a lot about it, sometimes it's easy to kind of just steer away from it. I feel like a lot of people do this with poetry, and a lot of the time they might read poetry and then they might think, I didn't really like that, when really what you need to do is figure out what within that particular genre you like. And that's what I want to do with history. And it's a little journey that I've kind of been on for a little while now. And I kind of just want to bring you guys on board and you know, join me on this journey of my exploration of the genre of history. So basically, I want to figure out what kind of history books do I want to read. And the way I think about history a lot of the time is in relation to school, so my education, and also in work. So I work in a bookshop and our history section is organised chronologically by country. So I'm thinking about it in a very country time period based way. So the first thing that I have done is I've asked multiple people that I work with that read history books to give me recommendations. Now they've given me recommendations that none of which I've bought but I found it interesting, and one of the things that stuck with me was one of the people that I used to work with said a good place to start with history books is perhaps to start with travel writing. So off the back of that, I picked up 2 books that were travel writing based, and I'm going to get them now because I don't have them in front of me. Bear with. So these are the 2 travel writing books that I have. So this is Venice and Interior, and then this is Lost Japan. So this one I probably picked up because it was little, and I just think that it's a lovely little looking book. It's got French flaps and I think it's just nicely put together. And then Lost Japan, I thought it'd be interesting to get a bit of a cultural history of Japan. Unfortunately, Matt at MCS Books didn't like this book. So I'm not sure if I'll like it or not, but it is quite well loved by a lot of people, so I'll probably still give it a try at some point. But I find it quite helpful to have that advice of read some travel writing, and that might help you then move into the history section of a bookshop. So that's why I got those 2. So here is some wobbly footage of a bookshop. This is the history section. As you can see, there's quite a lot of books to choose from. So when it's a genre that you're not that familiar with and it's a genre that you don't explore very much, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. Looking on tables is really useful, or looking at books that are faced out on shelves is really useful. But this can be a little bit overwhelming, and it certainly is for me. The Black Prince is a book that I've been recommended. I've also watched the film The Favourite and I've really enjoyed it, so I might like the book. Wounds is a book that stood out to me, and The Unwomanly Face of War as well. Tom Holland is also an author that I've been recommended a couple of times, so he might be an author that I might want to check out, and this is another book that I've been recommended as well. So these are all books that I need to look into in more detail to see if they're books that I might like myself. This one here is one that I just know is quite popular, and sometimes history books in bookshops can end up in other sections such as smart thinking like Sapiens and Homo Deus. I'm now going to look at my Goodreads shelf and we'll see what books I've got. I've got like a little history shelf, so let's take a look at that. So the first book on my history shelves on Goodreads is A History of Western Astrology. It's a subject that I'm interested in, although I did find this to be a particularly dry read. Red Notice is a very popular Russian history book, reads like a thriller. I really enjoyed it, listened to it as an audiobook. The next 2 books are actually children's books, and in many ways I think they're a good place to start as well when it comes to exploring the genre of history. Utopia for Realists is a little bit more of a politics book. I enjoyed that as well. Timekeepers and Sapiens I'm going to talk about shortly in this video. Next up is Queer City. It's a book that kind of disappointed me. It's looking at gay London, but I found it a bit too fact after fact after fact. The next one is an autobiography of Gandhi, so you could argue that this is more in the biography section than anything, but I've never read it. I kind of obviously gained a little bit of an interest for a while, which is why it ended up on my Goodreads shelf. Chernobyl Prayer, that's meant to be an amazing book, which is why it's ended up there. Same with the next one. I think it won some prize, so then that's probably why it ended up on my shelf as well. This is London is meant to be amazing, so that might be one of interest. The Optician of Lampedusa, I read that and really enjoyed it. It felt more sort of fictional than anything. SPQR I read but didn't get that into. I just think that maybe ancient history isn't necessarily my thing. Girl Trouble, I absolutely loved that book when I read it. This next one is just on there because it's quite a well-known popular book. One after that I'm going to talk about in a second as well. Making Sense of the Troubles, I guess being from Northern Ireland to a certain extent I have an interest in the subject, but also at the same time I'm really sick of hearing about it, so maybe not. George Orwell might be a good one as well. And Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is also another popular one. Now I'm going to look at the books that I actually own on my shelves. I realise I've got a few more than I expected, and I think what I've kind of discovered is that a lot of what I like is history on a particular subject, but I really want to explore more history in relation to the world, so that's kind of the aim I'm going for. Now, one of the ones that I think I might try to pick up this year is The History of the World in Bite-Sized Chunks. I quite like it because it's short. Now, I had Bill Bryson's A Brief History of Everything, or whatever you call it, but I've had it for ages and I got rid of it, and still, you know, I never seem to want to read it for whatever reason, but I think this one might be a bit more of a goer for me because it is slightly smaller, and I think it might give me an idea maybe of something in particular that I might like, and therefore I might read a bigger book on it and expand upon something in here that's only just touched upon. So I think that that might be another good place to start. Another book here that I've actually read is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. This is a kind of history book that I don't necessarily think of it as a history book, but it obviously kind of is. But this is kind of, it's more of a popular type history book, if that's such a thing. Very easy to read, very accessible, but I really enjoyed it and I find it really fascinating. So I find humans interesting, but I've got a lot on my shelf in terms of like popular psychology, and I guess this kind of veers off that to a certain extent, but I did really enjoy that. Another one that I've read is Timekeepers, and I find this really interesting. It's a history of time, and I think largely because I find time itself very interesting, and always have done. I've always kind of like wondered about it, and I like watches and clocks and find them really cool, and I find it really interesting to kind of learn about the history of time. Where did time come from? Trains are responsible for the fact that we got time in the UK that kind of was the same everywhere, because for a while, you know, Manchester and London had different time, and I find that really interesting. So again, this is another history book in which I'm focusing in on a particular subject in relation to history, which I've obviously discovered that I quite like. The rest are books I haven't read, so again we've got The History of Philosophy, so that's focusing on a particular subject. We've got A History of the World in 21 Women. This is a proof copy that I got sent. Again, it's kind of focusing in on a subject, and this was published, I think, just last year when there was a lot of publishing celebrating women, which is great. So I think that this one kind of interested me. You know, I've got Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and you know, obviously that's geared towards kids, but I kind of think about it more as a coffee table type book, whereas I kind of wanted to read an actual physical written book about women, and I think it'll be quite interesting to see what women are actually in here. So there's that one. This one I got sent as well, which is Humans, A Brief History of How We Fucked It All Up. That is probably perfect for me because I'm frequently thinking about humanity and how much it pisses me off, so I may as well read a book about it. And I feel like I kind of was interested in this off the back of reading Sapiens, so there's that one. Then I have Prisoners of Geography, which is more sort of geopolitics, and Divided, Why We're Living in the Age of Walls. These are more political to me than anything than they are history, but they are still technically kind of history books. I don't know why I never seem to read these. I feel like I'll probably really like them if I do, but there's those two. Then we've got this beast of a book, which is The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. It's just massive. It's about a history of violence and humanity, which I think is going to be super interesting to read about. But it's tiny print and it's huge. So will I ever read this? I fear that it's going to sit in my shelf forever until I eventually get rid of it. But if anyone's read this, please encourage me. And then the final one, which I'm probably most interested in, is The Age of Wonder, and it's a beautiful cover, and this is kind of looking at the history. Well, the subtitle on here is How the Romantic Generation Discovered the Beauty and Terror of Science. So I guess it's a history of invention, a history of science. So again, it's another one that's focusing on a particular subject within history. So those are all the books that I've kind of own. So they're probably good ones to start with, but I still want to explore more. And I kind of want to take you on my journey with that. I've mentioned before, narrative history is a particular genre that's of interest, so I may well explore that a little bit more. I think a good place to start is also to go into bookshops and explore the sections, you know, not just the bookshop that I work in particularly, but to go to other bookshops. I find that quite useful, and I think being a bookseller is also just helpful because I just slowly kind of get to know all of the books that are in the shop, and there's a few that have kind of stood out to me. Anyway, this is kind of just a rambly video to kind of take you with me in my exploration of the genre of history. We'll see where we go. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in my next video. Bye.